Improvement should be the watchword of the saints, that we should strive to advance in all that elevates and purifies. Eliza R. Snow.
Welcome to the In Her Image podcast, seeking and celebrating Heavenly Mother through scripture, scholarship, meditation, the arts, and everyday life. We're really glad that you're here with us again. We're excited to speak with somebody who we've admired on Instagram for a long time. We love her work. She is a change maker for women. In fact, her Instagram handle is LDS Changemakers, and she works within the current policies of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints to offer specific behaviors that can be brought more in line to increase gender equality in the church. So, welcome, Shelby. I'm so excited you're here.
Me too.
So, first of all, I'd love to hear a little bit about why you decided to start your account and maybe a little background on who you are and how gender equality became important for you.
Ooh, okay. How do I tell this the short version? Okay, so I grew up, I suppose you could say I was very feminist growing up. I lived in a house and was raised in a family where all of our diverse pursuits were encouraged. My parents are super awesome. But at the same time, that blinded me to be able to see the ways that my church experience was limiting me because of my gender. So I just didn't believe that that was real. And I grew up, went through BYU, got married, had kids, did everything that was scripted out for me to do. And I ended up actually having a very difficult time after having my second child. I just really personally don't enjoy parenting. It didn't really live up to what I was promised it would be. And so for the first time ever, something I was told to do, and that would be good, basically only good for me, hard but good, my lived experience conflicted with what I had been promised. And so because of that experience, I was able to see other ways that the universal prescriptions for women that come from our religious beliefs have limited women and men, past and present. And so that really lit the feminist fire in me for good. And after that, I really wanted to do something to help improve gender equality. And after listening to an episode of At Last She Said It, which is just a fantastic podcast, they gave an example of something one local bishop did in his ward that empowered women. And I thought that was amazing. And I wished that there were a way that those specific ideas could be shared. And so then I just became the way to share those kinds of specific ideas. So that is how gender equality became important to me and how I started my account.
I love that. Be the change, right? Be the change you wish to see in the world.
Yeah, exactly.
Well, it's great. And it's such a great account for any member of the church to follow because there's ideas in there for everyone. Things that can be suggested to ward leadership, things that can be done by, whatever calling you may hold in the church. There's just so many great ideas. So I highly recommend following Shelby's account on Instagram.
Thank you.
It's fantastic. And there are tons and tons of ideas too. So I know that a lot of people want to know how they can be more inclusive and invite that equality. So it's really nice to have so many ideas all in one place. So really grateful for your work.
Thank you. Yes, I think it surprises people to know how much we can do within the current policies. And that's another reason why I hope a broad spectrum of people feel safe with my account is that it's something you can do right now. You don't have to feel like you're challenging the systems that be to make some small noticeable changes.
Yes, and I always appreciate when you share, you'll even share like screenshots of the handbook. It's like, this is totally
It's
in
all
line.
handbook approved.
Yes.
100%.
Yes, so great. And I think so many of the things that we do are just based in tradition or culture rather than the actual policies or doctrine of the church. So it's good to kind of start parsing that out and seeing clearly, okay, what is policy and doctrine and church approved, and what is just what we do because we've always done it.
Exactly. You get it. You get me.
Yeah, maybe that's why we're friends. So Kate and I really wanted to have at least one. We wanted to have a whole month of March filled with women's history. And this is the first episode where we're getting to it, but we're really excited for some of the quotes and insights that you have to share. Not some. We're excited for all of the quotes and insights. Because you have done a little bit of study into some of the early women of the church, specifically Eliza R. Snow. We love her. We love that hymn, "Oh My Father," which was originally a poem, Invocation, or the Eternal Father and Mother, I believe is what it was called originally. Yep. And it's maybe one of the only hymns, maybe the only, that mentions Heavenly Mother in our hymn book. So what can you tell us, having done some study about her life and her history?
Okay, Eliza Roxy Snow. I love her middle name. She is so fascinating. Yes, she is part of the reason why Heavenly Mother became part of our doctrine. And so I think it's so appropriate that we're talking about her on your podcast specifically. She was born January 21st, 1804. And as you said, she's a poet. She's a very celebrated LDS poet. And I'm not sure actually how many of her poems became hymns. I should have looked that up. But yes, she wrote Invocation, or the Eternal Father and Mother. And she was also Relief Society secretary under Emma Smith. So she was in the very first Relief Society presidency. But after Joseph Smith's death, the Relief Society actually stopped meeting for, I think, a couple of decades. And it never quite got going again until Brigham Young commissioned Eliza Snow specifically with reestablishing it. So at that point, she became the General Relief Society president. And she would go around training local relief societies, trying to get them going, trying to give them leadership training and help them start up.
Wow. I did not realize that. So she was like the first Relief Society president of the reformed. That doesn't sound the right word.
Well, I don't know what to call it. The second gen of Relief Society. Yes, she was.
Huh. Very cool.
And she also, I think this is very interesting about her. She, in addition to being a poet, she was also a visionary woman. So she actually had a vision that reminds me a lot of Joseph Smith's first vision about the experience she had in choosing to be baptized into the church. And I want to read a little quote of that, if that's okay.
Absolutely.
Okay, so I think this came from... Someone was writing down her telling it. So it's not necessarily her writing it down. Okay. But this is what she said. She went to the meeting, and as there was nothing said about baptizing, she arose and asked the privilege to be baptized. But before she arose, the powers of darkness came upon her mightily. It was as though a personage stood before her and tried to dissuade her from her purpose. But the powers of darkness were dispelled, and light shone upon her. She was happy then, but not as happy as now.
Wow.
And that's a little hint at her vision that she had.
Oh, that's amazing. Thank you for reading that. What was it like for you studying all of her discourses that you have read? I know you've read quite extensively about her, right?
Mm-hmm. I read about 2 decades worth of these discourses, which I haven't counted how many that is, but It was a really interesting experience. I was glad to get to know her. I felt like I was able to get to know her personality a little bit through reading these. Like the leaders of the church do today, she repeated a lot of the same things and stories. You know, you can't always write a whole new speech every time you go anywhere. And she was trying to train the Relief Society presidency, so obviously certain things would get repeated. So it was a very interesting look into her mind and into her beliefs. And so but it was a pleasure to get to know her a little bit. She scares me a little bit, to be honest, but she came across very intense to me. And I am in awe. I'm in awe of her.
So what are some of those, I'm curious what some of those themes were that you noticed that she would kind of repeat?
Yeah, that's a great question. So she talked a lot about trying new things. She really encouraged women to speak up, to like get used to commenting, get used to speaking, get used to going to visit people, whatever. She seemed, I don't know if this was accurate, but she seemed to assess the women as being timid, and she was trying to invigorate them to be less so and to try new things. And that was interesting. It's important to know, she was also a staunch advocate for polygamy. So there were many occasions which she took to convince, especially the younger women, to get on board with that. She was also of the type of person, and certainly the generation that very much encouraged, you know, getting back up and brushing yourself off after any kind of failure or disappointment, which as a millennial, obviously, is probably why I was terrified of her. But so we would consider it toxic positivity nowadays, but I'm sure back then that's how you dealt with things. So she was very, very fearsome in that regard.
That's interesting. I wonder, you know, how much of that came from how she was parented. Yeah, the culture of her day. Yeah.
She seemed to think that that if you had problems, they could only get bigger by talking about them. That was kind of the attitude.
Interesting.
So she gave a lot of speeches about, you know, just keep going, don't complain, you know, that sort of thing.
Interesting. Are there any other details of her life that you want to share?
Yeah, I just want to mention that she is not the sister, or sorry, she is the sister of Lorenzo Snow. I grew up believing she was married to Lorenzo Snow, since we always call her Eliza R. Snow. But she was actually one of Joseph Smith's plural wives, and then after he died, she went across the plains and she became a plural wife to Brigham Young as well. So she was married to two of, the first two prophets of our church, and not Lorenzo Snow, as I believed until, I think, this year.
Interesting. Maybe that sheds a little light into why she was a staunch advocate for polygamy if she was practicing it herself.
Absolutely, times two. And also important to know, she never had any children.
Okay, I didn't realize that either.
Mm-hmm.
Interesting. So Eliza was certainly a historical woman of power, as she was, leading and teaching. And what did that power look like, and how did the administrative structure of the Relief Society back then differ from how it is today?
Let me just start off by saying that I am not a historian, so if any historians listen to this and I have gotten this completely wrong, please let me know. But after reading 2 decades worth of her trainings to Relief Society presidencies, I was very much struck by the power that they had over Relief Society and the seemingly little oversight that bishops had. She did mention every now and then, making sure that the bishop was okay with such and such thing. But largely, they seemed to be in control of the Relief Society service, finances, callings, releasings, meetings, everything.
Wow, so that is pretty different.
Mm-hmm.
That's interesting. I didn't realize until the last year or two that the Relief Society was a lot different. I didn't realize that it was not a thing for a little bit there, and then was kind of restarted by at the request of Brigham Young. And so it's just interesting to think about how different the church was back then, and also the Relief Society specifically, and how it was more autonomous and has kind of changed. So what would you add about the spiritual practices and power of the early women of the church? What about that was different?
Well, I would say there's a lot different. To tie it into how things were different administratively, I think it's important also to note that the women, okay, here's a specific example. They had a calling of being a Relief Society teacher, just like we have today. But back then, the teachers did a lot more than teach. So she trained them at length about the duties of the Relief Society teachers, and they were supposed to be visiting members of the ward, ministering to them. She says, do all the good you can if any such are cast down, who have lost the Spirit of the Lord. Speak words of encouragement to them. Impart of the Spirit from your own bosom to enlighten them. Bring them back to the light of the gospel. She also talks about begging on behalf of the poor. Part of their duty was to ask for money for the poor among them. And she also wanted them to try to understand the spirit that prevails in people's houses when they went there. So that to me implies spiritual power in that calling. And it's very similar to the duties of a teacher, the office of the priesthood that we still have today. Their duties are described in Doctrine and Covenants, section 20, 53 through 59. I'm not going to read that, but they're very similar to Relief Society teacher duties back then. So there seemed to be more to do, or more given to them to do in visiting. Mm-hmm.
And I've heard too, I think I might have heard this on another podcast, that there were some who were called priests as well, who were in the Relief Society, and some who were called deacons. Did you read anything about that?
I did not find the mention of priests in the 2 decades of discourses that I read, but there was a third decade that I didn't get to. So I'm sure that is probably true. She did mention deacons in what I read. Just very an offhanded comment. So they didn't describe what the deacons did in Relief Society. But yes, so these titles that we use in reference to ordained men, they seem to be applicable to women as well.
Fascinating. I wish I could just take a little glimpse into what they were doing and what it looked like back then, and just observe them like a fly on the wall for a little bit.
I know. I would love to be sitting in one of these trainings and just watching Eliza R. Snow just do her work. I would love that.
That would be so fun. And to see, how the message is received and the looks on all the listeners' faces. This is kind of backtracking a little bit, but where did you first gain the desire to learn about Eliza R. Snow?
So I was listening to the LDS Women podcast, and a church historian was describing their project to compile discourses for Eliza R. Snow, and it just lit a fire in me to read more of the words of women so that I could quote them more often, and so that I could look to them as leaders, because I have read a lot from those, throughout church history from men. I've read tons. So I just wanted to seize that opportunity to read something that a woman had to say.
I love that. That's such a great idea. Such a good study idea to look back through the words of the women leaders.
Yeah, and interestingly, you can read all of these discourses on churchhistorianspress.org. And I actually noticed when I logged on yesterday that they have the diaries of Emmeline B. Wells up, and she was an LDS women's rights activist. So I want to read her diaries as well, because a diary just sounds even more interesting than some notes taken on a speech. So,
oh, that's awesome. Next thing to study. Okay, so speaking of back to the power of the early women of the church, another thing that has come to light, at least for me, I didn't know this until the last couple of years, is that women in the early church used to give blessings. Did you read anything about that in her works?
Yep, that was mentioned several times. I was amazed. I previously thought that was just kind of folklore, but she talked casually about it. She specifically said she wanted to relate an incident which occurred with her when her first son was about 6 weeks old. He was taken very sick one day. The prophet Joseph came in. He told her to bathe the child and anoint it with oil and administer to it, and he would get well.
Whose child was this?
I think that was Eliza. Oh, wait, no. She didn't have any kids. Okay, hold on. She must have been quoting someone. Okay, let me interject really quick and say these discourses, they are not verbatim speeches from Eliza. They are notes that secretaries took on her speeches.
Okay.
So let me look up. I'm not sure who was speaking. It was probably just a member of that local ward or branch.
Right. Those just included in these notes.
And so because of that, they asked President Snow about that. And she said that Joseph had said it was the privilege of the sisters to lay hands on the sick. And that if we are united, we shall have the spirit of healing, so that the sick shall be brought to us. We shall lay our hands upon them, and they shall be raised up.
Wow.
So it was very much an acceptable part of their practice and very blatantly encouraged by Joseph Smith. There's another article written by Linda K. Newell about this called The Historical Relationship of Mormon Women in the Priesthood, and she provides other examples of this as well from other women, other sources. So it seems to be a very well-established fact.
Interesting. I've heard that there were multiple accounts as well of specifically blessing women in labor, that the midwives, that was something the midwives would often do as well, which I think is so beautiful. And I have an image coming to mind that Anthony Sweat painted of a lady on a bed, and she's surrounded by women birth workers or her support team, and someone is giving her a blessing. I think that's such a beautiful, beautiful thing. And something that I've personally always felt drawn to. My whole life I've thought, I am a healer. I don't know what it is. I don't think I'm supposed to be a doctor, maybe a physical therapist. But the more I learn about our history, the more I think, oh, this is part of my heritage and something my ancestresses may have done. And it makes me want to think of ways that I can, whether I lay on hands or, find ways that I can heal. And some women say, pray over my children, my family.
I love that. I think that's beautiful. And you come from a history that would welcome and celebrate that. And so that seems to have changed. Well, it definitely has changed the celebration of that fact. But I love how in tune you are with your spiritual gifts.
Thank you.
One other thing that is interesting is that President Snow also gave what I term presidential blessings. Since she was president of the Relief Society, we're used to prophetic blessings or apostolic blessings, but she gave blessings to the groups of women, vocal blessings to the groups of women that she was training. This is an example of one. Quote, she then said, I bless you in the name of the Lord, and by the authority I hold, I bless you. And so I find that to be really interesting. There were other examples of that. She just, blanket blessed the group just vocally. And that's not something that I personally have ever witnessed a female leader do, but I have experienced it from male leaders before.
I have the same experience as you. And it's always beautiful when that's done. I've felt a powerful witness from the Spirit when I've been blessed in a blanket way like that. And I can just only imagine what that would feel like coming from my sister leader. That is so Powerful. Thank you for sharing about that and for sharing those stories. So today we share a lot of information on Instagram or TikTok or Facebook or wherever online. But of course, back when Eliza R. Snow and others were starting things up, those were not a possibility. So, will you tell us a bit about how they communicated back then, how they would disseminate information besides, her traveling and speaking personally to different congregations?
So, back then, they had a magazine. It was, I guess, considered semi-official. It was a semi-official publication of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. It started in 1872, and it was actually pretty overt in its discussion of women's rights. They published articles frequently about suffrage, about plural marriage, which they defended as a right of theirs to participate in that. They published poetry and other writings, but I love thinking of it as like the older version of what we're doing today. That's awesome.
And what was that publication called?
So that was called The Woman's Exponent. It was a Utah ladies' journal. And the goal of it was to discuss every subject interesting and valuable to women. And they had some pretty spicy quotes in there that I was shocked to read from women of that period. I love reading quotes from the Exponent. It's amazing.
Do you have any prepared that you'd like to share with us here?
Yes. Okay. So this one, I just love this. Okay, let me just preface this by saying that I don't personally want to take Adam and Eve as like all men are like Adam and all women are like Eve, Okay. But this was a spicy comment I just loved. Okay, so someone who just put their initials, ENB, so I don't know her full name, she wrote, "I know we are taught that Eve was the first to sin. Well, she was simply more progressive than Adam. She did not want to live in the beautiful garden forever and be nobody, not even able to make her own aprons." Just like, yes, love it. Go off, queen. Another one, okay, they had a lot of quotes that were very supportive of a woman's right to define herself, her own identity, her own calling in life, so on and so forth. So this is an interesting one. Quote, "I think it is the most arrogant presumption for man to assume the right to decide all points of right and wrong, all questions of propriety or expedience, and even what is womanly. Being a profound believer in reciprocal rights and duties, I protest against further allowing men's opinions to be our highest court of appeal until they shall pay the same high honor to our opinions. Just think, in that case, of the vast overturning there would be in the world's affairs. Until that happy day, I insist upon my right to have and to hold my own opinions and to act upon my own judgment." Boom. Mic drop.
Yep.
And again, just initials. Clap. LLD from St. George, Utah.
Thank you, LLD. I love that. So good. It reminds me of a quote that I saw on Instagram probably today or yesterday by Chico Okazaki. I think she would be saying, yep.
Oh, Chico is so good. Yep. Chico would be so down. So they were also very supportive of women working if they felt called to work. There's a quote that I've used before, and so has the lovely Kate Toronto. It says, "It has been the popular cry that no woman could be a good, true, loving wife and at the same time successfully follow any profession. If so, neither can a man do justice to any professional calling and prove a kind, affectionate, and loving husband." And then the last one I'll read was somebody who signed their name the old maid in the corner. And she wanted to make her case for singleness being a legitimate life choice. Awesome. So she said, this one's a little longer, but I love it, so we'll just hold on. Okay. She said, I suppose you men, lords of creation, entertain the idea that because some people remain single and continue to remain single for an unlimited length of time, and these persons happening to be of the feminine persuasion, that it is because they never have had the opportunity of changing their conditions in life. Let me hasten to disabuse you of these false impressions and assure you that such is not the case, but that it is possible, absolutely possible, for some persons to exist even when debarred the exquisite pleasure of the charming society of the sterner sex. I have no doubt that you will greet this with a cynical smile, as your conceit and vanity are developed to such an extent as to prevent you from accepting it as truth. But such it is. You may call me woman's rights advocate, blue stocking, or any other tender epithet, I care not. I am independent and not afraid because I am a woman to express my views on any subject. Boom. The old maid in the corner. Boom. 1875. 1875.
Wow. I want to meet her.
I know. Same. So I'm just so shocked. I'm so shocked that was published in a semi-official publication of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. Can you even imagine the ensign having like actually the ensign does, or excuse me, the Liahona. Doesn't it have some like comments from readers sometimes, and it'll say their name and where they're from on like the back page or something?
Yes.
Can you imagine it saying this? I cannot.
Signed the old maid in the corner. We should start sending in little blurbs and signing it that way and see if they ever get published.
Let's do it.
I have a feeling we won't be quite as successful.
No.
Those were great. Thank you so much for pulling those out and sharing them with us. It is another way to connect with them, right? To think, we aren't the first ones to want change. We aren't the first ones to love choice and sovereignty and all of these things. And maybe we get it from somewhere. Maybe it's running through our DNA or our, church.
Our spiritual DNA.
Our spiritual DNA. Thank you. So finally, our last question is, in what ways are we moving forward or backwards for women in the church from these early days? And what do you think we can do to step forward and upward for future generations of women in the church?
Ooh, okay. So, based on our discussion today, it's obvious that in some ways, women in the church have a more restricted role than they did 162 years ago, especially when you consider the lack of autonomy in Relief Society presidencies. I'm sure you and a lot of your listeners have been in a Relief Society presidency. So that's not to say that they're sitting there twiddling their thumbs doing nothing. The opposite is true. But it's to say that the oversight of Relief Society ultimately does fall on the head of the bishop mostly. And depending on who your bishop is, that can be lovely. He might be hands-off, very encouraging and supportive. And in that case, maybe your experience has been more like these sisters of long ago. But, there are also bishops who are more nitpicky or more micromanaging. And so women in that Relief Society presidency would certainly feel much more restricted and much less trusted than in times past. And so I think until we have a structure that can codify men being hands-off, we will always be a little more restricted than they were. So that would be an avenue for improvement, giving women complete control over the Relief Society group, over the service it performs, over the lessons that are taught, over the finances of it. We didn't talk about this at I think we mentioned it, but Relief Society was in charge of their own finances. They had their own means of income as well. Like when you donated to Relief Society, it went to Relief Society. So, that's an area for improvement. And some people may relate to that and some may not. So that's different now. And that has changed, that changed primarily in the 1900s. Around the time, it got more and more, the control of Relief Society and the control of everything really got more and more centralized. And so that's the way we've maybe gone backwards. But since that point, I feel like to me, in my opinion, there was a time where it was very centralized. And I think the church is taking baby steps away from that. Maybe not the centralization of the authority, but in many ways we're moving forward now, especially with the content of lessons and the rhetoric around womanhood. I think it's getting better and better every year. They're adding more leadership roles. They are actually taking away some of the duties of the bishop and handing them to the Elders Quorum president and the Relief Society president. So I think of it kind of like there was a valley. We walked down into the valley, and now I see the church slowly rising up the other side and coming back out. So I look forward to seeing what changes come in the future to keep us moving forward.
When President Nelson said that quote a couple years ago of eat your vitamins and hang on because there's so much more revelation yet to come, it makes me curious to what his vision might have been or be currently, and if there are more changes for the Relief Society or women. It's interesting to see how, like you talk about rhetoric, we talk more and more about how women have an endowment of priesthood. And that's something that hasn't really been taught, I don't think, until recent years. And so I'm hopeful that those things will continue to progress because women do things really well. And I am excited to see what women could do with even more autonomy and opportunity. And I think just the opportunity for partnership. I love that concept of equal partnership, that if both are valued and given opportunities, then we can co-create beautiful, beautiful things.
Yes, I love the idea of co-creation. And I hope that the system and the structure will change to reflect the changing dialogue around women and men and reflect co-creation in the future.
I do too. And maybe that'll be a little bit messy and we won't get it perfectly, by we, I mean collective.
Yeah, the collective we.
Yes. But that's kind of how things work, right? When they're touched by human hands. And yeah, hopefully we can hone in on better and better equality and partnership and all those good things. Okay, Shelby, do you have any words of wisdom for us as we wrap up? Any last thoughts?
I think that we got to everything that I wanted to talk about. I'm just so grateful that you would ask me to talk about Eliza R. Snow. I'm so glad the hours I spent reading the notes that the secretaries took on her speeches didn't go entirely to waste. And I'm so happy to share more about her with others. I just think it's so important to get to know our female leaders, past and present. I think that the more we look to women for leadership, the more the general population will come to see women as leaders. And so it takes a lot of personal effort to go on these websites and dig up these discourses, or, if you read Emmeline's diaries, to dig these sources up. They're not in the Come Follow Me manual. They're going to be extracurricular if you're doing that study. So it takes personal effort. But if we read them and we teach others about them, then the words of women will be spread around. And then maybe, just maybe, that will help the rising generations know that women are leaders.
Beautiful. So let it be written, so let it be done. I hope that we can all take that to heart and look to the words and examples of women in our giving talks in church or lessons or even just in conversations, that we can be a little bit better read and come ready with quotes from amazing women, and that we can have even more and more quotes from them as we continue to have general conferences, etc., because we have been blessed with some really amazing female leadership. So thank you so much for highlighting Eliza specifically today, and for sharing your research and studies with us and your ideas. This has been a great conversation, and let us know when you finish reading your next leader. We'll have you back on again.
That would be awesome.
Thanks, Shelby.
Thanks so much, Jess.
Thank you for listening. If you enjoyed this episode, feel free to share it. And if you haven't yet, please leave us a review. If you'd like to support the podcast, you can make a monthly donation at anchor.fm/inherimage. You can also send us a voice message at the same website, sharing one of your stories about Heavenly Mother. We would love to hear it and might even share it in a future episode. We hope you'll tune in next Sunday for another inspiring episode.